You also
Right.
constantly face criticisms or even attacks on your ethnic, there seem to be ethnic and xenophobic attacks a lot because it has to do with your lineage. And I don't think anybody ever, for political expediencies, should run away from who they are. It's not a thing. I don't condone it. I don't accept it. And any politician who does it is not a politician I would respect. And so you've become that has also become a central issue in our politics. Mostly the description is not, Nar is not going to be a president in the country. You hear it, and it's not even, people are not running away from those problematic statements. Now I want to ask you specifically, when you hear those things, what comes to your mind? Does it bother you, or does it speak to you in terms of the mindset and the extent to which politicians and their followers would go to portray a certain image that is below the standard and
Uh,
ethics and values that we
yeah.
as Gambians collectively should uphold?
Yeah. So I think it all comes down to poor governance. I am one who's a big fan of, Paul Kagame and Rwanda. He brought in ethnic laws that criminalizes, discrimination on somebody's tribal lineage. And, the sentence for hate speech is imprisonment. So I think that has no room, in any society. The only reason they have that confidence to say certain words like Nar will never become a president because they deem, Arab people of Arab descent to be a minority group. But, they wouldn't dare say that about, a Fulani or, a Mandinka person or a Jola person because they view those numbers as much larger. So it's it's poor political strategy. I don't know who's advising these people or they're just showing their true colors. But they're doing more damage to themselves. And it's not something that, is new. My entire political career, I've heard comments like that. It's just that then it was at a smaller scale because I was running for mayor. And now because it's presidency, it's, being amplified, But they said Anar will never win the UDP primaries, going against 6 Mandinkas. Then they said Anar will never win the first election of mayor, then the second election. But every time, I prevailed. And the reason I prevail is because I am a very focused person and I have an iron will. Many people see me and they don't know. And I always surprise them. Because when I start, I never stop until I get to my destination. Because I'm not doing it for myself, I'm doing it for country. And it's sad, it's despicable. But then again, I look at politics as an alternative to war. You think you can hurt me, you think you can break me down, you're fooling yourself. And every time they do it, I get more, determined. And a lot of the people who speak about, oh, he's a nar and stuff, if we did a test on Gambian lineage and we dared each other, if somebody is more Gambian than the other, then the loser will be exiled. I think I will defeat 99% of people who make those claims. My grandfather is Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara. He's the founder of Gambia as a nation. In 1965, we got our independence. He was right there. His younger sister, Nandonding, gave birth to my father. My grandmother on my mother's side, Mariama Jamme, has lineage all the way to, Mansa Musa. The Jammes of Badibu, they moved to Bakendik. She's a princess. You look at Alaji Seho Drame on my mother's side, my mother's father is a Gambian, bona fide Gambian. So the only person who migrated in my family from Morocco, Fez, is my grandfather, Seedy Bensouda. And he came in 1910, where
Wow.
most of the people talking, their grandfathers did not enter Gambia or did not come to Gambia. So, if my mother was the one who was Bensouda and my father was Drame, with the same bloodline, with the same heritage, they would say, oh, he's a Gambian, and I would look the same.
Yeah.
So I think it's ignorance, it's hate speech, it's stupid, it's sad. But I think they
Yeah.
do more damage to themselves than they can ever do to me. For me, I expect in politics is one thing or the other. As far as they don't say that, I have killed somebody or I have done a heinous crime or make a proven accusation such as theft or corruption, you can say whatever. I give an example. I know, sorry, I'm dragging on this answer, but
Oh, of course, go ahead.
I give an example to one of the people who was concerned by some of this hate speech, and he said, "Man, Talib, these guys, they're so full of hate." I said, well, it's one thing or the other. In my first mayoral election, in the UDP primary, they accused one guy from stealing from a mosque. They accused another guy of having mental illness. They accused another guy of credit card fraud in America. They accused me of being a Jew. At the time, they said I am a descendant of Jews. So I said, well,
So silly.
I would rather be accused of being a descendant of an Arab person rather than being stealing from a mosque or doing credit card, fraud.
Def-
So
yeah.
in politics is one thing or the other. So it comes with the territory. You only wish there was stronger laws and governance, because if you want to build a harmonious society and a country that has discipline and respect, you really have to draw red lines.